Inheritance and Monopoly, the fairness argument. In the United States, we laud the notions of fair competition and equality of opportunity. In fact, these notions are constantly used to justify many things about our political and economic systems. But we also have massive tax protection for inheritance. Roughly put, a person could inherit about 11 million without paying taxes. This presents an obvious tension. How do you have fair competition and equal opportunity with an inheritance system that massively favors the wealthy? It might be claimed that there is no problem here. But to show that there is, I'll use the game of Monopoly, and of course this is totally unsupported by the owners of Monopoly, and of course I'm using this as an example, etc., etc. No claim that they support or even have heard of this notion. And what I'll advance is essentially an analogy and an appeal to intuition argument. What I'm trying to do is this. I'm trying to get you to think about whether you would play the game of Monopoly with inheritance rules and how your thoughts in this matter might apply to the real world. Now, almost everyone is familiar with Monopoly. If you're not, the rules can be found at the link presented here. The idea basically is this. You win by driving all other players into bankruptcy using the rules of the game. In normal play, the outcome of one game does not affect the next. The game is equal opportunity and fair competition, in that everyone starts with the same resources, in the same place, and with the same chance to win, based on ability and luck. My proposed variation adds in inheritance rules to simulate, in a very, 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 very simple way, the impact of, obviously, inheritance. This variation requires playing multiple games of Monopoly. So here are the rules for Monopoly inheritance. Again, no claim that these are official rules of any kind, and again, just this is the point of this is making an argument. And this is the zero-sum game version. And here are the 3 rules for this. Rule 1, the first game in the series is played normally using the standard rules. Say just play Monopoly. Rule 2, upon completion of a game in the series, the winning player records what they possess at the end: money, property, houses, and hotels. Rule 3, at the start of the second and later games in the series, one player is randomly selected to receive the game possessions of the winning player from the previous game. The receiving player is the heir, and the possessions make up their inheritance. The other players start normally. The game is otherwise played using the normal rules, aside for the exceptions noted in these rules. The series ends, well, it ends when no one wants to play anymore. Now, there can be, of course, a couple inheritance variations to kind of change things up a bit. One is fractional inheritance as an optional rule to the optional rules. The heir receives a percentage of the possessions of the previous winner. 75%, 50%, or 25% are suggested. Property is selected by drawing the property cards randomly, round up, any fractions. Second option, multiple heirs. 2 players are randomly selected to be heirs, dividing the possessions of the winner between them. This can be done as a 50-50 split or a 75-25 split at the discretion of all the players. While a player who is not the heir could win the game, an heir has an incredible advantage. Anyone playing can easily see how unfair the game is. This should help people intuitively see how inheritance of significant wealth is inconsistent with having a fair and competitive economic system. From a philosophical standpoint, the first game could be considered a state of nature game, of the sort envisioned by our good dead friend John Locke, in which everything is initially available to all and property is yet to be divided up. The players in the second and subsequent games are obviously taking on the role of the next generation. Since birth is random and inheritance is not actually merited by effort, the heir is selected at random rather than being the previous winner. I admit the obvious. This analogy will break down very quickly. To illustrate, some examples, the real world, of course, features multiple heirs. There is no equal start for everyone else. There is not just one game with one winner and so on. My point is, of course, not that this game variant is a perfect model of inheritance in the United States. Rather, my goal is to get people who are fine with the inheritance system as it stands to play this variant and see if they still feel that this is a fair rule set for the game, and then to think about whether it is a fair rule set for the real economy. The question I want to pose is this: would you play Monopoly by these rules? Why or why not? Now, one obvious counter to my analogy is to point out that the real world economy is, mostly not zero sum. I turn to this matter right now. So, Monopoly Inheritance, non-zero sum game. And so here are the rule variants to make it non-zero sum. So while Monopoly does reflect zero-sum aspects of the real economy, because the game is about owning properties and major businesses, like railroads, and these are zero-sum matters in the actual world. If, for example, I own a vast tract of land, that means less land for other people. While we can make more usable land by draining swamps and building islands, there is a finite amount of land on Earth. The same generally holds for businesses. There is a finite limit, and the success of my business in an area does limit the success of others to a degree. So for the zero-sum parts of the economy, Monopoly is not a bad, super simple model. But about the non-zero-sum aspects of the economy, what if Monopoly made into a non-zero-sum game? In the real economy, the idea is that the sum grows over time. The same can be applied to the game. A crude way to simulate this is to add in the board expansion rule variant to the inheritance rules. This allows for theoretically unlimited money, houses and hotels, etc., and you can add them, as needed. Either 3D print them if you want to be fancy, or just use other objects on hand to create them. To play this variant, you'll need several Monopoly boards. So here are the rules for the non-zero sum game. Rule 1. Prior to the start of the next game, place another Monopoly board with its go square adjacent to the just visiting square of the prior board. Repeat until the players decide to stop playing. Play begins in the go square on the board from the first game. Rule 2. Once a player's piece has completed moving completely around the board, from go to back to go, they must exit the board and move to the next board. A board is exited via the just visiting square and entered via the go square. Once a piece has completely moved around the final board, the piece must be moved back to the prior board and so on until the original board is reached. This process begins anew and continues until the game ends. The board a piece is on is treated as the game board for that piece. Alternative rule. Instead of being forced to leave a board after moving completely around it from go to go, a player can elect to stay on the board if they wish. This rule allows players a chance to escape the original game's board. This variant does allow for a non-zero-sum game, limited only by the number of Monopoly boards on hand and the number of houses and other hotels and stuff that you can create. While I do agree this allows the players who do not have the luck of inheritance a better chance, the player who gets the inheritance still has a significant advantage. While there will be a new board with property available to all players each game, the player who has inherited from the previous game will be in a far better position than the other players to acquire the new property. The main effect of the expanding game would seem to be that the heir player will have ever more property at the end of each game, and thus the next heir will have an even greater advantage over the non-heirs. While this game is not zero-sum, those that lack the inheritance will probably still lose, and those who inherit will generally do better. So I'd close again with this question. Would you play non-zero sum Monopoly? Why or why not? I suspect most people would not, seeing it as an unfair game. The same, I would contend, also applies to real life. So stay safe, stay alive.